All praises to the Most High, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Raha Kodash. Double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations to the hopeful elect, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, laboring in this truth in all sincerity. Habakkuk, chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. And I'm going to read this in the NLT. Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai replied, "Look around at the nations. Look and be amazed, for I am doing something in your own day, something you wouldn't believe, even if someone told you about it. I am raising up the Babylonians, a cruel and violent people. They will march across the world and conquer other lands. They are notorious for their cruelty and do whatever they like.
In another important development today, the U.S. military is escalating its crackdown on drug trafficking in South America. 2 months after the invasion of Venezuela, officials say the U.S. now has troops on the ground in Ecuador taking part in joint operations against narco-terrorist groups. In a series of raids yesterday, Ecuador targeted a group that officials say was trafficking drugs to Europe.
Okay, that was the video just now that I came across on Twitter, X actually, formerly known as Twitter. And this is in regards to the United States now going into Ecuador. And they're stating that the motive behind this is narco-terrorism. So they are accusing Ecuador of trafficking drugs into this particular country here. And that is the reasoning behind them now doing a joint operation with the military of Ecuador in an attempt to confront the cartel that's currently in Ecuador that's trafficking drugs here, allegedly. And this is an article from Democracy Now! This was dated from earlier today, March 4th, 2026. U.S. deploys special forces to Ecuador and new expansion of U.S. operations in Latin America. The Pentagon has announced U.S. special forces are now in Ecuador to conduct joint military operations with Ecuadorian commandos to reportedly target suspected drug traffickers. The head of the U.S. Southern Command and the top commander of U.S. Special Forces in Latin America met with Ecuador's right-wing president, Daniel Noboa, in Quito on Monday. Last year, Noboa proposed a constitutional change to allow the U.S. to operate a military base in Ecuador, but voters rejected the proposal. The deployment of U.S. troops to Ecuador marks a new front in the Trump administration's so-called Operation Southern Spear. Since September, the U.S. has blown up at least 44 boats in the region, killing at least 150 people. Without offering proof, the Trump administration has claimed all of the targets were drug traffickers. And I'm going to read a few excerpts from another article real fast here. And this was from, see if I can find it. This is from Columbia One. This is a news source fresh out of Colombia. This was published earlier today, March 4th, by an individual named Natalia Falah. New joint military operation in Ecuador raises questions on U.S. presidents in Latin America. So I'm not going to read the entire article. It is pretty long. I'll just read a few sentences from each paragraph here. The U.S. has initiated a new joint military operation with a presence in Ecuador aimed at dismantling what both governments describe as narco-terrorists and transnational criminal organizations operating within Ecuadorian territory. I'll scroll down a little bit. Yet beneath the language of partnership lies a larger geopolitical dynamic, a renewed U.S. security footprint in the Andean region under the banner of combating narco-terrorism. So I think Colombia already sees that there are going to be some ulterior motives there, that, they're there under the guise of helping them fight narco-terrorism and, prohibiting drugs from coming into this country. But when it comes to the U.S., you never can put it past them that they would possibly be there for another country's resources. Just an idea, just a thought, not accusing the country of anything. I am just stating what the obvious is, what the obvious criticism would be. If Colombia is stating, hey, this isn't the first time this has happened where they come here, all you have to do is look back into the 80s. You go back into the 80s under Reagan, you had the whole, various things where they were down in Panama, dealing with a whole lot of guerrilla warfare there. But, it was the same thing. Oh, they're trafficking drugs up here. We have to go down there. Next thing you know, the U.S. is there for an extended period of time, extracting resources. So I'll read that part again, though. Yet beneath the language of partnership lies a larger geopolitical dynamic, a renewed U.S. security footprint in the Andean region under the banner of combating narco-terrorism. The development raises pressing questions. What strategic message is Washington sending to Latin America through its expanding military cooperation? And is narco-terrorism becoming the central framework through which the U.S. justifies deeper involvement in the region? I'll pretty much stop it there. They're basically questioning, and maybe rightfully so, Colombia is in that particular region, and they're just wondering, out loud, what is the underlying issue here? Is this simply because, you feel that there's cartels here that's helping to traffic drugs into the U.S., or are there resources down in this region that you are interested in? So with that being said, I want to go back into something here. So I asked the Google AI overview, what natural resources are in Ecuador? Ecuador's economy is driven by significant natural resources, primarily petroleum, which accounts for over a third of export earnings and a quarter of public revenue. Other major resources include rich agricultural land, bananas, cocoa, coffee, seafood, shrimp and tuna, timber, developing hydropower potential. So I'm just going to focus on petroleum and gas here, and maybe minerals and metals. Petroleum is the most important natural resource, with major reserves located in the northeastern Amazon region. The country also has significant natural gas deposits in the Gulf of Guayaquil. And that is what I believe the issue may be, what Colombia is concerned about. Are you here for the petroleum, but also minerals and metals? The country has rich deposits of gold, silver, copper, zinc, lead, and molybdenum. And I do apologize if I mispronounced that last one there, particularly in the Andean region. And that's exactly where the U.S. is located, where their troops just happen to be. They are in the Andean region of this particular country. So right about now, Babylon has their hands in everything, Just in Latin America alone, you have Venezuela, as well as now Ecuador, and they're still threatening Colombia and Cuba, as far as, sending troops into those particular regions in order to well, they're stating that they're trying to help stabilize these particular countries and prevent drugs from coming in. But like I said, this is always an issue revolving natural resources. Based on developments as of March 2026, Ecuador is strengthening ties with the U.S. through increased security cooperation and simultaneously expanding agreements regarding natural resources, including critical minerals. And I just want to stop real fast. North America, Central and South America, we do understand that this is where the tribes are. The 12 tribes are here. So there's no coincidence, that the U.S. right now, they're picking up where they left off. There seemed to be a slight pause in here in the overall grand scheme of things. There was a slight pause regarding manifest destiny, and it looks like they're picking back up on this. So this is the reasons now for, going into, Latin America, which is, they're down in Central and South America now. Also parts of the Caribbean, I would say, with Cuba, and then there's also Colombia as well that they're looking to go into, and these are the northern tribes here. And so the northern tribes right now, their lands are being occupied. Their minerals are under siege, and it's under the guise of combating narco-terrorism. But I'm going to pick up again where I just left off. Based on developments as of March 2026, Ecuador is strengthening ties with the U.S. through increased security cooperation and simultaneously expanding agreements regarding natural resources, including critical minerals. Security for resources. Ecuador's President Daniel Noboa has framed the intensified joint U.S. Ecuadorian military operations against drug cartels as a new phase that also includes action against illegal mining. Mineral agreements. In February 2026, the U.S. signed 11 new bilateral frameworks, including one with Ecuador to secure critical mineral supply chains. And that's what it's really all about right there. The U.S. they're not doing this for free here. Obviously there is a deal in place to where, hey, we help you do this under the guise of, we're trying to prohibit drugs from coming into our country, but you are going to come up off of some of those resources. Legislative reforms. In late February 2026, Ecuador's National Assembly approved reforms aimed at boosting the mining sector, specifically accelerating environmental permitting processes to attract more foreign investment. So it's all about that money, expanded mining projects. Ecuador is in the process of reopening its mining cadastry for medium and large-scale projects, including tenders for the $3 billion. Wow. I do not know how to pronounce that word there. I would say Lorimagua copper project, and I do apologize if I mispronounced that, if I completely botched that pronunciation. Trade framework. In February 2026, the U.S. and Ecuador concluded negotiations for a new agreement on reciprocal trade, which aims to increase alignment on economic and national security matters, including strengthening trade in mining products. While the immediate driver of U.S. military presence is to fight narco-terrorism, that's the reason that they're saying that they're there. And like it says, that's the immediate driver, but that's the guise. They're there under that guise. These actions are occurring in tandem with Ecuador's push to formalize and accelerate the exploitation of its natural resources, gold, copper, silver, and petroleum, like I mentioned earlier, through partnerships with the U.S. and other international entities. So, like I said, Babylon right now, they have their hands in everything. You have the issue going on in Iran. Iran. There was the issue just a few weeks ago in Venezuela. Now we're here in Ecuador, and then you still have lingering issues with the superpowers as well, China and Russia, not to forget North Korea. those issues haven't even started yet. So the U.S. right now is stretching itself out very thin here. So that's something to keep an eye on. The U.S., in addition to all of the various countries that they're in, that also includes Nigeria. Uh, they're still dealing with issues in northern parts of Africa as well. So right now the U.S. military is being stretched real thin, and Trump has only been in now just a little over a year. It hasn't even been a full 2 years yet. I believe, he was just elected November of 2024. He was sworn in January of last year. So, we're just a little over a year here. And when you look at the amount of countries that we're in, and we haven't even really gotten to the major superpowers here yet. It's always something to keep an eye on when a country's military starts to become a little overextended, especially this country, because one thing about this country, the people, no matter how much they support a war, there's been plenty of times where the U.S. public supported a war, when they felt it was necessary. When I remember when 9/11 happened and George Bush got up there and made that speech, everybody was cheering him on, but once we got there and it was like, wait a second, if these people were in Afghanistan that did this, how the hell do we end up in Iraq? And not only are we in Iraq, it lasted for about a good 2 years, if not longer than that, if I remember correctly. And eventually the American public starts grumbling. Nobody wants to hear about American troops dying, or nobody wants to keep turning on the news and seeing American troops being maimed or blown up in these foreign countries. So the longer these conflicts go on, or the more stretched out this country, makes its military, the more grumblings you're going to start hearing in terms of, it's time for a shift now. Let's move from the Republicans back to the Democrats. But it's not going to be anything different with the Democrats. All of this stuff is, each one of these presidents are figureheads. They're all basically controlled, so it really wouldn't be any difference at all. It's just right now, Trump is who they have selected to carry out these particular operations here. But I'm going to continue reading for a little while. The Trump administration's second term military operations focus on hemispheric security and fighting designated terrorist organizations are heavily concentrated in the Middle East and recently Latin America. And that's what I was just stating about, he's only been in here just a little over 1 full year now. And now that he's in, we're already in 2 different hemispheres fighting. Here we are. You already have troops right now in the Middle East, as well as now you're in South America. So eventually, depending on how long this goes on, people will start grumbling. People are going to get mad. But the way Nero is, he doesn't really care what anybody thinks right about now. He wants his face on Mount Rushmore. He honestly feels that he deserves to be up there with, the so-called founding fathers of this country. And because we're now about to enter a brand new phase here, which is, artificial intelligence, this is like that new frontier we're going into. So that's why you hear him every so often mentioning putting his face on Mount Rushmore, because he feels that because the U.S. is going into this next phase of technology, that he should be there, as we're just now entering the 4th industrial revolution. And this, like I mentioned just now about AI being this new frontier. That's why Trump every so often keeps mentioning, hey, my face should be on some form of American currency. I should be up on Mount Rushmore. He honestly believes that, this is Nero back in the flesh, and he has a uncontrollable ego. So I'll get back into reading some of this here. Known countries with active U.S. military operations, and this is just in 2026. Ecuador, which is just now starting as of last night. Venezuela, the U.S. carried out a military operation in January, which included bombings in Caracas and the capture of President Maduro. Iran, ongoing strikes in the region. Iraq, ongoing strikes and military presence under the guise of, I believe, I forgot which one of those Islamic terrorist organizations are starting to regroup there now, so they have picked up military strikes in that country as well. Syria, same thing, ongoing military presence and operations. Yemen, ongoing strikes against Houthi targets. Somalia, ongoing operations against terrorist groups. Nigeria, operations reported by early 2026. Key details on the Ecuador operation. Start date was March 3rd, announced by U.S. Southern Command, and I'll pretty much stop right there. Let's look at this. Wider military footprint. Beyond active direct military operations, the U.S. has military personnel stationed in approximately 170 to 178 countries globally, and that's what I was stating earlier. You know, whenever no other country spreads their military like this. This is the whore that sits upon many waters here. This is Babylon. You know, if you can't see this, you know, there's no way you cannot see this. That America here, you know, the land that we are currently in, this is Mystery Babylon in the book of Revelation, and that's why they called it Mystery Babylon, because you wouldn't really understand that this was that the Babylon that the Bible is speaking of. It would be a mystery up until the latter days where you can actually see these prophecies playing out. You know, so once again, the U.S. has military personnel stationed in approximately 170 to 178 countries globally. This broader footprint includes bases, training, and logistical support, notably with high concentrations in Germany, Japan, and South Korea. I believe this is what I just read, or something similar. I may have typed it in a little bit different. During his second term, which started January of last year, the U.S. has engaged in or escalated conflicts with several nations, primarily through military strikes targeting Iran, Venezuela, Yemen, Somalia, Nigeria, Syria, and Iraq. Major actions included joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities and military, as well as operations against alleged drug vessels in the Caribbean linked to Venezuela. And this is pretty much what I just read. Key military and diplomatic conflicts include Iran, Venezuela, Middle East, and Africa. Other tensions. The administration was involved in high-stakes negotiations or friction regarding conflicts between Armenia, Rwanda, Congo, and Egypt/Ethiopia. Additionally, the administration's actions led to tense diplomatic relations, particularly with Iran following the bombing of its nuclear sites and accusations from Venezuela regarding U.S. intervention. And this is what we call a muscular foreign policy. The U.S. right now is engaging in what's known as a muscular foreign policy. Trump's second term has included a much more muscular foreign policy than his first. This was written back on January 8th. I believe this was before we went into Venezuela, if I'm correct. But nonetheless, on January 8th, when this was published, it stated President Trump ran as the peace president, but since taking office has been on a military spree, with strikes on Iran, Yemen, Nigeria, Syria, and Venezuela, and threats against others. I'm not going to read this entire thing. I've probably already covered most of what she's going to say in this particular article, but I just really wanted to harp on that term, muscular foreign policy. A muscular foreign policy, that is a robust, proactive, and often militaristic approach to international relations that emphasizes strength, confidence, and the threat or use of force to achieve national objectives. It is frequently used to describe proactive interventionist or warlike strategies. Military strength often involves increased military spending and a willingness to use military force, such as strikes against adversaries. Interventionism, a tendency to intervene directly in foreign conflicts, as seen with U.S. actions in the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. Big stick diplomacy. And I remember years ago when I was a teenager, if I'm correct, I was in high school at the time, and this particular phrase came up, and we, in class, we're laughing because this president right here, Teddy Roosevelt, if I'm correct, that's what he actually said. He was pretty much the same way Trump is, and you're threatening the use of your military against various nations, and he was stating, I remember this coming up in class years ago. This was his, big stick diplomacy. And of course, that is a play on words there. Big stick diplomacy. Pretty sure everybody understands. Ideological basis. It is often associated with realpolitik, where national interest and power are prioritized over diplomacy or international norms. And that is exactly how Nero operates. Just as it states here, national interest and power are prioritized over diplomacy or international norms. So where other people would try to talk things out, try to negotiate, like when Nero says, "Hey, I would have negotiated a deal if I was president and they didn't cheat last time around from 2020 to 2024. We would have never been in a war with Russia. We would have never been in a war here. I would have negotiated. I would have cut a deal." That's what he says. But as you can see in his second term, there's no negotiating here. He is doing exactly what it says here under ideological basis, where national interest and power are prioritized over diplomacy or international norms. So as of right now, there is, no talking with this guy. Everything right now is going to be military action until prophecies completely play out and this place becomes the lake of fire. But right now we are in the early stages of what looks to be World War III starting. So this is it. And Nero is flexing the U.S. military's muscles. So like I just mentioned, for a guy who said he would negotiate all kinds of deals and bring peace, it hasn't been that during his second term. He's basically unleashing the U.S. military, and it doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon. Like I said, this is the beginning stages of World War III here. So it's not going to stop. This is the final conflict. It's still in its early stages right now, but it's going to keep moving forward until this place is the lake of fire. And this kind of brings me to Jeremiah 50 and 23. Jeremiah 50 and 23. And, Babylon is referred to here as the hammer. And ultimately in this same verse, Jeremiah 50 and 23, Babylon becomes a desolation amongst nations. So you see, it's known as the mightiest hammer here. If you look at it in Jeremiah 50, 23 in the NLT, Babylon, the mightiest hammer in all the earth. But ultimately, we see its end as well. It lies broken and shattered. Babylon is desolate among the nations. And I'll read that in the KJV as well. How is the hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken? how has Babylon become a desolation among the nations? And that also goes into Revelation 18, 1 and 2, the fall of Babylon. After all this, I saw another angel come down from heaven with great authority, and the earth grew bright with his splendor. He gave a mighty shout, Babylon is fallen. That great city is fallen. She has become a home for demons. She is a hideout for every foul spirit, a hideout for every foul vulture, and every foul and dreadful animal. So this place is going to become a complete wasteland, just inhabited by, wild animals. That's what's going to come out of all of this flexing of the muscles right now that he's doing, that Trump is doing. It's not going to last. This is the final go round right here. So, even though we do know the ultimate fate of Babylon as pursuant to the scriptures that I've just read, I'm still amazed, just watching this whole thing play out. And that's exactly what the Most High Yahweh Bashem and Hawashai, he actually says that in the opening scripture that I read, Habakkuk, and I'll go back to it, Habakkuk chapter 1, and I'm going to read this in the KJV and the NLT. Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 5, KJV first. Behold ye among the heathen and behold ye among the heathen and regard and wonder marvelously. For I will work a work in your days which ye will not believe, though it be told you. NLT. Yahweh Bashem and Hawashai replied, look around at the nations, look and be amazed, for I am doing something in your own day, something you wouldn't believe, even if someone told you about it. Yes, and that is the prophecies. That's these prophecies playing out. Basically, every single thing that the Most High Yahweh Bashem and Hawashai laid out is exactly how it's playing out right now. And this is why, the Most High is saying, I'm doing something in your own day. Our own day is right now. Something you wouldn't believe, even if someone told you about it. So things that he's already, spoke. He's already spoken all of this 3, 4, 5,000 years ago. And so these things now, we are right now in the 6th day. So if we are in the 6th day right now, that's 5.5. That's 5,500 years ago, 5,500 years ago. These things were spoken. 4,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, these things were spoken. And we're seeing it all play out right now. And so I'm just in amazement just watching this whole thing play out. But, this is Babylon. Back to that, overextending its military, so, and I actually did a video series on this, 7 symptoms of Babylon's impending doom. This was roughly maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And, so I've already really covered this as far as, I believe that was like part 4 and, 7 symptoms of Babylon's impending doom. And I believe the title of that was military overextension or something to that effect there. But in that particular video series, that came out before Nero was going to war with Iran or sending troops into Venezuela while threatening Cuba and Colombia now with the same. So watching these prophecies play out, like I said, I'm still in amazement. The Most High Yahweh Bashem and Hawashai told us exactly what was going to happen. And it's all playing out right now. So all praises to the Most High Yahweh Bashem and Hawashai. And with that, I'm going to end this with Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 3. This vision is for a future time, and that future time is right now. This is the current time that we are in. This vision is for a future time. It describes the end, and it will be fulfilled. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it will surely take place. It will not be delayed. I pray this video has been edifying and reaches the ears it's supposed to reach. Shalom.